Hello and welcome. I'm Haste, and this is a guide to help you tune vehicles for dirt. We're gonna tune an A-Class muscle car, an S1 mid-engine vehicle, and a Porsche, just to show you some variants and explain a couple key tips so that you can have the best tunes and make the most competitive builds on Forza Horizon 4. Let's get started. Alright, so first things first, the most important thing is maximizing your build, right? So what I do is I get the essentials, and I just start with the essentials, okay? So the essentials for dirt are generally all-wheel drive, rally tires, rally suspension, if the stock suspension isn't any good. I don't know, sometimes they are, give it a try. Anti-roll bars, and that's really it. From there, I start looking at the power. I check out the stock motor. Got a pretty good power curve here, a lot of torque. Might be able to use that, but let's look at what we get. We get the 6.2 V8, always a strong motor, especially in A-Class. The 8.3 liter V10, which is the Viper motor, yes, always an extremely strong motor. And we're still in at a pretty low PI, so we might be using that. And the 6.5 liter V12, you know, yeah. Just want to go for it. Personally, I think I'm going to go with the 8.4 liter V10. I tend to find that the muscle cars that can get this motor and utilize it with a supercharger, which this can, tend to perform really, really well. Alright, so next, before we do any power upgrades, I want to check on weight. Oh, this is very, very heavy. So let me see something really quickly. What if we went with this and the supercharger? Nice. That way we can get the weight reduction. I think we're gonna go this way. You know, if you're building for cross-country, it's fine to keep the weight in, but for dirt, because you're on the road so much, you kind of want lighter vehicles. So we're going to go with the weight reduction, the V8, and the supercharger instead. Next, I want to be able to stop the car. I personally like race brakes, not always mandatory. We'll see how it goes. We'll see if I feel fast enough with them. If not, they might come out, who knows. And we're gonna go ahead and grab a supercharger upgrade. If you can use the centrifugal supercharger on a motor, by the way, you definitely should, as your forced induction add-on choice. It is extremely PI efficient, and if you can get the max supercharger on it, your car flies. It really, really does. I always at least upgrade the rears. It helps cars stay more stable, and it doesn't normally cost a PI point, and I personally like to do the fronts. Not a lot of people do them. It does cost a PI point. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. It is what it is. I'm gonna add rear arrow to bring it back down again, and we'll go ahead and check our transmission. That's a lot of top speed. Alright, we're gonna grab the racing transmission, and the other mandatory part, of course, is the racing differential. We got another PI to point to play with. You can either put on some rims, or you can continue to take weight out of it. Drive lines are very good. Ooh, we can also get a clutch, so we'll do that. And now let's see if we can get anything else. Yeah, that's definitely not going to work. I don't really need it though. It's A-Class. Pretty good for A-Class. Do we want a cool hood? No, we don't want a cool hood. We're gonna be lame. Alright, last thing. Can we get... No, that's gonna give us 4. What about some rims? Can we get some weight off and stay in A-Class? Yes, we can. We're gonna do it. Installer setup. 625, 2,900 pounds, 1.7. These are some pretty good numbers. Chevelle might come out pretty good. First things first, before we do anything and touch anything, you want to drive it. Just to kind of get a feel, see where you're at, what you can, you know, improve on, what feels nice, so you know what to tweak, right? To me, this feels like the rear end's pretty stiff. It's bouncing a little bit. Front end turns pretty well, but it could be the rear end holding it back, and that could be the aero or the suspension, one of the two. Could even be the diffs, who knows. But it's definitely got a couple things that we can improve on. Feels pretty stiff. See how it jumps off things. Oh, it landed pretty good. Weight might be helping that. Alright. Cool. Let's go ahead and tear into this and see what these stock values are. And what we can do to improve it. Alright, so let's start with the givens, right? The givens start right here as soon as you open up the tuning menu. The first thing you want to do is just go ahead and drop your tire PSI all the way to 15. The reason why you do this is because Forza Horizon has nice broken physics where tires won't pop. And that's beautiful because what we can do is abuse the fact that flatter tires give you more traction. So, here we go. Start with tire pressure at 15. If later on when you're done, if you like your car, right, and it doesn't quite have enough turn in, but you don't really want to mess with things because it's perfect, but it doesn't just turn in enough, you can always raise your rear tire pressure up 0.5 or 1. It'll help your car turn in a little bit more. So the other givens, brakes. Like I said, I do race brakes. I do 200% brake pressure. You can do your balance where you want. You can do 100% if you're on ABS or on keyboard. But I do suggest it, especially for the big muscle cars. They're big boys. They're fat. I mean, they're hard to slow down. It's okay. But they're very strong in a dirt, so we're going to go ahead and use it. And then we have, of course, our differentials. Now, differentials for dirt, I always do 100, 0, 100, 15, 65. Okay. So what they do, right? Your front differential, when you are accelerating and you go into a turn and your wheels start to lose grip, is when your differentials start to kick in. And how high this number is on acceleration is how much power you will shift to one side or the other under acceleration, okay, should you start to lose grip. Now on dirt, it's important to have that 100 because it helps us push in through turns where you might not have grip. You push all your power to the one side and it throws your car to the side. Okay, so as you can see here, your front differential, right, now that I've upped it, you see how my car really turns in? Because I have all that power pushing one way or another, and this is very, very helpful on dirt because you want the most possible control at any given moment. So if you have 100% of the wheel, power going to the wheel, it's losing it, whatever. I always do this. It gives you the most amount of turn in. It helps you get the back end of the car around, which on dirt is hard because you're sliding. On road, I don't suggest these 100, 0, 115, 65 settings because you don't want to send all of the power necessarily to one wheel when you're on the road. But on the dirt, it actually helps a ton. Go to gearing. Gearing is something that takes a lot of time to master, but basically, stock gears are what I like to call almost good. Generally, it's like first gear is a little bit too short, and then like fourth gear is a little bit too long, which makes fifth gear a bit too long, and ultimately sixth gear a bit too long. So generally I'll run a power curve that kind of looks a little something like this, especially on the V8. And then from here I will generally make sure that my first gear is generally just before this, and generally final gear I will have somewhere in the neighborhood 3.4, 3.6. Generally, like If I can set it to 4.1 and completely re-gear it to have a top speed that I want, I'll do it. But if my gearing with arrow in the rear all the way down doesn't give me like the top end I want, I won't even go for it, and I won't, you know, mess with it too much. I'll just end up keeping it where it was, and honestly these numbers look pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and lower it a little bit just to get a bit more top end, because the V8, it's pretty strong in A class. So we're gonna make it go about 180. That's where I tend to like it and where it tends to perform really well. Last thing about gearing. When you are doing gearing, right, you want to make sure that you are making your gears hit what is your effective power band. Alright, and every motor is a little bit different, and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. So with the V8, right, we have this beautiful little area here that is this beautiful peak, okay? Now the V8 also peaks below where the horsepower peaks, so truly when you're looking at it from this perspective, you know, you're on dirt, you want your peak torque, and you want to use your peak torque as much as possible. So really this area right here is probably going to be truly effective, but from here up is extremely effective, okay? So you want to make sure that your gears are dipping into the areas that you can make them the most effective, right? And this is actually why the V8 actually tends to like gears or cams, is because what you're doing is you're extending your effective area. But because we have a supercharger, it kind of like balances things out a little bit more, and you don't really have to worry as much about nailing it, if you will. But because it's like that, I will have a lower gear final drive with tighter gears overall, so that I'm making sure that I am in my effective power range as much as possible. We're going to give these a try and see how it is, and show you how to actually test your gears. So on dirt specifically, the most important part of a dirt race, believe it or not, is just the launch. Making sure that your car can get off the line quicker than anyone else's is a great way to ensure that you get the clear air. And on dirt, when you're slipping and sliding, it is really effective to just be in front. That's a pretty good launch. There was still a little bit of that hesitation, so what I'm going to do is kind of go back to the launch one more time and see if I can make it just a little bit better. So we're here, our second gear was pretty good. Let's go back to what that stock number was and then tighten second slightly and see what happens. From a dead stop. Alright, we're still bogging, so we're gonna go ahead and tighten the final drive just a bit. Gonna hurt our top speed some, but it should bring us back to a good start. So it's a lot better, a little bit tighter, and I think we'll be okay. What you're looking for is a bit of a wheel spin to where it jumps you forward, right? And so that you can, you know, if you happen to start on a hill, it's not going to matter as much, because your first gear will pull you, as you can see. So generally with the V8, you're looking around 5,000 to 5,500 for your shift points as that effective point. And as you can see, we are really hitting that. As I run out second gear, I'm running around like 5,300-ish. So I shouldn't really ever have a point where I can't accelerate, which is fantastic. That's exactly what you want. Okay, let's go ahead and go to anti-roll bars. We're going to go ahead and talk about resetting, and this is something that I do to help me get good areas of the vehicles to start with. With anti-roll bars, you know, you make them softer, you let more of the weight transfer. If you make them harder, less of the weight transfers, and it's kind of, it makes the car stiffer in, you know, the front or the back. Typically people run 165. There are a couple other presets you can run. I like to run 132.5, and this is on most vehicles, not all vehicles. Sometimes if it's just not pushing, I'll even go down to 21, 15, 12. I've gone as low as 1.1 to make a car feel the way I wanted it to. But like I suggest, I mean, I like 32.5. 32.5 for me is the sweet spot. You know, Dallas is in chat here saying he is 165 and that 165 is bae. You can choose, you know, try a couple, see what you like. This works for just about every, you know, front engine, rear wheel drive car, anything all wheel drive, most vehicles in general. The only time it really doesn't work is like with older Porsches and rear engine cars in general, and that's why I'm gonna have one of those in this as well. We're gonna go ahead and save springs for later, but generally this is roughly where I would keep my springs anyways. This is actually an amazing stock setup for springs. The front being higher than the rears, and them both being around the end of the T and soft, because you want your vehicle to be able to turn in more with the front end, but have a nice stiff enough suspension to hold the rear end while you four-wheel drive drift through the corner. Because of the fastest way to get through a corner, well, not all the time, but sometimes in real, you know, on dirt, is with the four-wheel drift. Going, you know, forward through the turn, maybe tapping the handbrake a little bit, powering through it. So you want it to be able to do that really, really well, but you also want it to be able to hold itself on the road. Which is why when we get to dampening, generally I will do it backwards from this. And this explains to me, at least like seeing these numbers, why it felt stiff, is because that front end was really high up. Generally people will do base numbers to kind of get a feel for the car and kind of see what it needs. Generally my base numbers for muscle cars is this: 3, 3, 1, 5, 1, 5, but it doesn't always end here, you know. Some cars this really, really works on and works really, really well, and the spring rates are perfect and everything is Gucci, happy, everyone's, you know, good to go. But sometimes, you know, muscle cars will be balanced with this, and sometimes they'll wash out because the rear end is too soft. You know, I've had muscle car builds that look like this and work better than if they were just on these settings. I've had muscle car builds that wouldn't turn unless I had them even sitting like this. So really what it is it's about finding that base value that works for you, and then testing to see what you think of it. Now, I liked the rear end of the car prior, so I think this is probably going to end up being too stiff, but I want to try it anyways, just so I can see if the dampening feels good, because I liked the spring rates, right? I'll generally run like a 25 to 50 pound difference on the spread, just to get the front end to turn the way I want. Now, this feels good, but it feels really like boaty, like, I don't know, the suspension feels nice, like it's not washing or anything so far, but let's see how we do under braking. Turn in, pushes through really, really good. A lot better than I thought it was going to, but that makes sense because I already liked where the rear end was. It just didn't seem to push through. But okay, so this honestly feels pretty solid, but what I want to do is I want to see if making it softer makes it more controllable, because as I'm already seeing here, I don't know if you guys can see it too, but there's a little bit of like a jostle in the car, and that's coming from stiff dampening, right? It's not so much front to back as it is left side to right side. Okay, so to even that out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep my spread, if you will. And so when I look at my dampening spread, I would say that this is 2 to 1. Okay, 3.0 to 1.5 makes sense, right? So I'm going to keep this 2 to 1, and and I'm just gonna go softer and see if it's better, because with dirt you need it to be able to really handle jumping, driving off-road, doing anything kind of crazy. So now though, the problem is I feel like it doesn't turn. So rear end feels a lot more settled. That's awesome. So what we're gonna do is we're going to boost the front end a little bit more, because now it's not turning in. And the few things that you can do to increase turn in, right, in the front, are increase your front springs, increase your front rebound, lower your front stiffness, increase your front differential. So I didn't like this setup. I liked how it turned before. I'm gonna see if I can maybe get away with running this, because it was kind of close to that already, and see if it'll stay solid and planted. So this actually feels pretty good, and as you can see, I've really got a lot of good turn in here. As I'm on the power, very responsive. It comes back nicely. Great. Fantastic. Okay, so generally with dirt as well, I don't run as high of a ride height, but if you have a suspension setup and you really like it, right, and you can't get it to stop wobbling, okay, but everything else, like, it feels good, it feels fine, but it's just wobbling that little bit, you can always just lower your ride height slightly. For dirt, I really don't suggest going below 6.5 inches at the lowest, okay? For this, I'm actually going to keep it though, because I'm probably going to use this for cross country as well. So I want the ride height for when I'm going through water. Okay, so this one was felt fairly easy to kind of get, and we kind of went through everything that we needed to do for it relatively. But I want to go ahead and show one more thing with dampening that you need to check before you can just say, yep, feels good, it's fine. And that would be how it performs on the road in mid-speed corners. Because, as we all know, the unfortunate truth of Forza Dirt is that it's 80% road. So, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to drive on some of the road areas that we would see in our dirt tracks. So this is one of the popular ones, right? We want to see how it performs through the corners. Now I'm able to kind of throw it in with a feather off the gas and really put a nice slide through it. And though that might not always be the fastest way through the corner, it's generally a very consistently quick way. And you can set yourself up for the next corners by doing so. So to me, what I'm feeling is this is actually solid. We got lucky. Our spring rates were basically in the perfect spot right off the rip, and this is why you also drive it before you do anything. For me, I always do dampening before I do springs, and this is why. Our spring rates were great. We put on our dampening and kind of messed around with it and didn't have to touch the springs, and now it has the stock springs, and it, you know, was a road car, so here we go, perfect. And as we're driving it around, I really don't feel major issues with it. Obviously, it can always be better, right, with tweaking, but nothing that I would really want to change. It feels like it has plenty of power. It feels like it handles the bumps well. It's responsive on both the road and the dirt, and it's pretty quick. Not the fastest car in the world, but it's pretty quick. Ooh, well, traffic car. Perfect way to end it. Awesome. So what we're going to do is we're also going to share these tunes, right? See for yourselves, you know, if this is like the style that you want to go for, or if it's even just a good starting platform for you to use, is, you know, this method. Alright, so let's go ahead and go to a mid-engine car now, right? Because believe it or not, Hypercars and other cars of that nature are actually really good on the dirt, and no one thinks about using them. So let's do this. Obviously, it's probably not going to be fast, but I don't want to mess with gears. I just want to show the difference in dampening, okay? As I said before, we'll start with the rally tires. This vehicle is already all-wheel drive, so we're cool there. And we're going to put on differentials, rally springs, and apparently this car already has anti-roll bars. Okay, great. So, what do we got to work with? We got 3,300 pounds, 602 horsepower, 3,000 pounds, 2,700 pounds. Let's go ahead and do the 3,000 pounds and go from there. Because that's a pretty good weight for dirt. We still get top end. Not really. Okay, so because it's a rally car, really, you don't need all that much handling. My guess is this will be nice and solid either way. So we are going to use the stock wing. Because I want to use this one, but not for dirt, because if you're going sideways, that's just gonna destroy your aerodynamics trying to get a good slide in. So we'll go ahead and do this. From here, obviously, you know, we'll take the PI down. We'll do this. We'll get our rear stability. We will grab... Oh, we don't need brakes. How about that? And we're gonna put maybe more power, or let's see what a different motor gives us. Yeah, okay, cool. We're not going to do 200 pounds. That's fine. I don't know if this car will be any good or not. Oh, hey, look. Remember how I was saying if you have the chance to use the centrifugal supercharger, do it? Because here you go. Look at this.
I don't know what to say.
You get 52 horsepower. You get 50 extra horsepower. Forced induction. A better curve. Like, come on. Easy. Easy. Now let's go see if we can upgrade it. More in here, yeah? Oh yeah. 901, we can deal with 901, that's fine. Alright, so we're gonna go ahead. Alright, no. Put different rims on it. And just for... Ooh, nice. Get that for free. Oh, but I wonder if we can get that for free, because that would be better. No. But yes. Cool. Alright, here we go. So we're gonna go ahead and explain these little differences here, right? Generally the concept, at least in my mind, is roughly the same, but because you're now working with a mid-engined car, doing the even layout, if you will, doesn't really work because of how heavily these cars have their weight shifted towards the back. So you have to kind of compensate with your dampening and your springs, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and go through this, and I'm going to tune this like I normally would, right? But first we're going to do what we always have to do, which I definitely almost forgot. Don't tell anyone. We're gonna drive it. So for me, car feels good. It's always on power. Gears feel very short. Do we have 7? Yeah, we have 7. That's why. Okay. So for me, what I'm gonna do is elongate these gears 100%. We already know that. It only has a 211 mile per hour top speed. Already I'm feeling there's like a lot of understeer in the front. I gotta work that out. The rear end feels okay, maybe a little stiff. It's not quite stepping out the way I want it to. Like when I throw it in, it doesn't step out, but that could be corrected if we do the front. But we'll have to see. Okay, so let's go ahead and go through it, and I'm not going to touch the gears this time. I'm just going to do the, you know, differential. Well, yeah, I am. I'm sorry. I am going to touch the gears, but I'm not going to actually do a huge bit to them. It's going to make them long. So we'll start where we need to start. Tires down to 15, as always. Or the lowest setting you have. Oh, I don't have a transmission in it. I'm not touching these gears, apparently. Okay, so, with the camber, like I said, we do this to get a little bit of forgiving bite on the front end. If you aren't getting enough bite on the front end, you can lower this as well, once again, to increase your turn-in. I guess that's for... Oh, well, that's a good one. Anyways, rear end, we keep our camber at 0, just to kind of keep the tires flat with the ground. Kind of a nice hybrid between road potential and dirt potential. If you're doing dirt rivals, putting it to like +5 or +0.5 actually does help with a lot of grip and can help you get better times. But for PvP purposes, we're gonna keep it here again. I don't do the toe. I know a lot of people do this thing, and it just makes the car very skittish a lot of times for me. I like to keep my tires as straight as possible. If I'm having issues with braking and the rear end sliding out, if I can't fix it with the rear differential, I will fix it with adding negative toe only to the rear, but that's just me. Caster, for just about all dirt cars, going to 7.0 is basically what you want. It helps you get that swiping motion that helps you kick the back around and use the power to get through your turns. Because it allows for a more natural camber through the suspension, a little more give, if you will. If your car isn't quite turning in and you've done everything with the springs and now it's too bouncy and whatever, go back to your old settings and then lower your caster, so it will take away a lot of the natural camber that you can get under turning, and you can upset the car more to get it to do what you want, if you will. Anti-roll bars. Once again, I am a 132 on most of these mid-engine cars. If the front end feels wild and like the suspension feels good, but every now and again it just like turns in way too hard or flies off way too far, you can increase the anti-roll bars a little bit in the front to make it a little bit harder for it to toss its weight as quickly. That helps a lot. For springs, generally, I run a little bit stiffer springs when it comes to mid-engine cars, but you still want to make sure that your rear springs are stiffer than your front springs, which is the opposite of our front-engine cars, right? The reason for that is, once again, where the engine is located. So when you're thinking about a front-engine car, the further separation the front has over the rear, the more the front's going to turn in, right? Whereas the spring rates are kind of the opposite with mid-engine cars, and the closer the numbers are, the more the front is going to turn in, okay? So, you know, if the rear end of the vehicle feels too stiff and like it's not, you know, it's not stepping out, you can lower the rear spring rates, but don't go too low, or as you push through corners, your rear end will just kind of step out and just kind of push and you can spin. But, you know, if that's happening to you, just raise your rear suspension a little bit and you'd be surprised what a few little ticks can do. I typically go like 3 pounds at the most and then kind of go from there and tweak. But I will always generally have softer settings than most of the stock ones. So what I'm going to do with this car is I'm going to run a 100-pound difference. Right, and generally with mid-engine cars, anywhere from like 100 pound or 75 to like 150 pounds, I would say, is like the difference that you should look to run, and generally what works. And this is just kind of because I hated the way that this felt. The rear end felt really stiff. The front end kind of wanted to go, but the rear end wouldn't let it. So we're just gonna soften the rear end a little bit, soften the front end a little bit, just to give it a little bit more compression and the ability to turn in. We do our 2.0 on the front, just like we would do with the other cars as our stock, or the other ones as our stock values. But because, once again, we're mid-engined, what I like to do is 3.0 values in the back and start there. So I'll still make it even, if you will, sometimes. But just make it a third 3-to-1 ratio in the back instead of a 2.0 ratio. So we'll go ahead and start here and see how that feels when we get out. We don't have any aero to tune. Once again, our brakes 200%. That's just what I play. And then our differentials up to 100 0 and 125. Or sorry, 115. And this one starts at 60, but that'll actually help. Here we go. We're putting more power towards the back to help it get around through the corners. Okay, that's where we're gonna start. Now let's go ahead and see what we got. Obviously, it should be able to drive on the road. It's a supercar. That's great. So the rear feels soft, but it feels bouncy soft. So like, it's not where when I'm in a corner it feels good. It's when I go over some rough road, you see how the rear is bouncing, and it's coming from the bottom, right? Like when I'm bouncing, not when I'm landing, not when anything. It's like when I get anything unsettling, it gets light in the back. Okay, so that is actually coming from the gap between my dampening. So this gap, 4.2 to 1.4, is too far. But because it's coming from the bottom, right? And you could see it when I hit a bump, it looked like the suspension went up and it pushed back down, but then the back of the car went down with it. That means that your bump isn't stiff enough, okay? It means your rebound is good because it's pushing back, but because it's so soft, when the body comes and puts its forces down on the back end, it doesn't have enough bottom pressure to keep the car up, and so it dips and bounces. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and boost our rear, and we're going to go to that 2.0 ratio, but we're going to do it, you know, to compensate for the engine in the back, which is what didn't work with the last setup. Now sometimes this is too stiff, but a lot of times these will work. You're kind of tuning like you would a mid-engine car on road. You're just doing everything softer, okay? And with rally suspension and with the lock diffs. But now you can see it's so much better already. Like, do you see how the rear end of the car doesn't dip whenever I'm hitting those unsettling bumps? It's a lot firmer. Now it might even be too firm. So what we're gonna do, is we're gonna try, just because, you know, it can't hurt to try, what happens if we step down that 0.3. Like I said, I like to go down in 3s, so that feels pretty good too. I mean, it still holds really, really well on the road, if not a little bit more agile. It's not quite as tame, so it might be better on the dirt, because we might have been in a situation where we had a very good setup for road, maybe, but maybe not dirt. So let's see what this feels like. Oh, good start. That's nice. It doesn't feel like it's bouncing up too hard from the bottom end, which is the problem when you increase your rear bump, is that when you're on dirt, it can be too stiff and it can fight back against the car, right? So this looks like nice and smooth, even as I'm going over bumps and things of that nature. It feels alright. So, if anything, I would say it probably needs a little bit more turn-in. So what I'm gonna do, change the spring rates in the front, because I like the way that the car travels in the dampening. So I'm gonna go ahead and increase the spring rates just a little bit. Oops, that's way too much. We'll go 9 pounds just to see what happens, right? And now all of a sudden we have that little resistor, the spring. It pushes the car through more. Just that little bit. Just that little bit. That's all I needed. Just enough to push that front end a little bit more. So that when I'm turning and I push on the power, I can see the back end go I can turn into it while I'm on power. And yeah, this is good. This is good. Now, some people might like softer setups. Some people might like firmer setups. But when you're doing these, make sure you're keeping all of the elements of dirt in mind. You will have road. You will have dirt. You will have to drive across the map all willy-nilly. It feels good out here, but does it actually feel good to drive? And, you know, can it feel like it takes the corners properly? So to do that, you know, you can go to a number of different courses. Just find one that you like, that you know that you're pretty decent at, and that you know what a good lap feels like. And when you pick something that you have some knowledge on, you'll, you know, be able to judge your cars better. Is it fast? Is it not fast? Does this feel competitive? Where does it put me compared to like my rival's time or someone else's rival's time? Does it hit a certain time that I want anyways? Like, does everything feel good? And like, to me right here, I'm seeing that maybe the front end needs a little bit more spring rate. I mean, in terms of dirt control, it feels really, really nice. When I've gotten out onto the road from dirt as well, it seems pretty stable. So it might not be bad. It shifts weight well when you're off the brakes as well. Doesn't seem to understeer too terribly much. 51, that's decent. I mean, I'm not gonna sit here and do a ton of laps, but you know, it feels good. It would go out there and do alright in, you know, PvP. If anything, I might want to go back and swap with the gears, get a different transmission, and maybe go back up, because I didn't realize I had done that. So, give a little bit more front spring rate, see what happens. We might get that toss in we want, so. It's still not quite as responsive as I need it to be on. Ooh. And that might even be too much. Oh, yep, that's too much. See, that's the balance you have to find as well, because you go too stiff with the springs and it's game over. You start to understeer. So you gotta find that nice balance where it'll push you towards oversteer. And we'll try 12 and see what happens. Now this feels solid. It has that responsive additive of the 15, but it still lets the back end push through. You could probably go a little bit softer if you wanted to, but I dig it. Probably not gonna go out and win any championships in it, but the car feels good to drive. That's really what you're looking for. Who knows? Hang on. You're definitely going to be able to compete. Look at this. Oh no. The Porsches. A lot of times Porsches are weird in this game because they're rear engine, right? And remember how we said that we did this like drastic, like, how we said bringing the dampening closer together kind of will improve your overall balance on mid-engine cars. It's kind of like that on front engine, or the rear engine Porsches as well. And I'll show you kind of what I'm talking about, because I just built one today. that is rear wheel drive but felt good on the dirt, and that's really what it comes down to, right? Like, is can you drive it? A lot of the Porsches act really funny if you don't tune them. Completely different from every other car in the game, and obviously there are other cars in the game that are like this, but if a car is made for rally, is it worth changing the suspension? In my opinion, yes. The only time you can really get away with it is B class, sometimes A class with certain muscle cars, but I honestly would just spend the 2 points on the rally suspension. It's just worth it, and you have more options, you know? And yeah, it might depend on the car most of the time to get the most PI efficient build, but if you want it to feel good and know that you can be competitive and race with it, you want to be able to set it up, and therefore you want to go rally. So this is actually rear wheel drive, right? And I'll show you the numbers that I went through and did with this Porsche, because I did just tune it today. And obviously this was tuned for an event where they were forced to use stock drivetrain, stock motor, and we went from there. So what I did with this Porsche actually was a lot of the same things. Okay, so tires are at 15. I couldn't touch the gears, that's fine. My alignment, -0.7, 1.0. You know, obviously with the track that this is for, it is mostly dirt, so probably running the +0.5 would be more beneficial. And yes, it is 7, don't mind me, I'm just a troll. The anti-roll bars is really where I think the older Porsches get really fickle. As you can see, I ran 612. Now, most people would be like, why the hell would you do that? But if you drive this vehicle and it's rear wheel drive on dirt, you would see like the rear end pushes it through really well because it lets more weight go. The front end doesn't dip as hard because it's, you know, got that 6 pounds of anti-roll to help it stop from just absolutely killing you like a Porsche should, because obviously rear engine Porsches will do that kind of stuff, right? But it takes a lot longer for it to get there, and you can save it when you balance those out. A lot of times when you set these kinds of cars to like 165 or even 132.5 or 130 or whatever you choose and find that you like, these cars will just spin out. So I went with adding more on the front of the anti-roll bars than I normally would. But everything else, you know, pretty similar. Okay, so you kind of treat Porsches like mid-engine vehicles, right? And kind of try and account for the fact that the motor is going to push you through from the back, and that you need it to hold, but you still need it to be agile. So just like our mid-engine vehicle, we have stronger springs in the back than we do in the front, but because it's rear-engined and not mid-engined, I didn't do even ride height. Reason being, saved a little bit extra space to account for the fact that there's a motor hanging off the end of my car trying to push me down when I'm going over bumps and jumps. So I gave it a little bit more ride height to try and make it harder for it to bottom out. Here we are again, you know, I did the 2.0 both in the front and the back. 2.6 in the front on rebound, 1.3 on the front bump, 3.0 in the rear, 1.5 on the rear bump. So once again, just kind of compensate for it. And then from there, everything else is really the same. Obviously, I couldn't do differentials because, like I said, this had to be stock drivetrain. So, last couple things, right? And I'm going to use the CUDA to show this because I know the CUDA does it. So, we will go ahead and grab our CUDA. Yeah, at the end of the day, tuning is about a lot of personal preference, but this will give you really great places to start, places that you can mess around with, and places that you can get a better tune. This car, as you can see, actually does quite well on the road. It pushes really well, it likes to oversteer, it'll hold a drift really well, and it also does quite well when being driven on dirt. But it wasn't always quite like that. It used to only be driven like it was on dirt, okay? And let me show you, I'll just go ahead and show you exactly what it was, right? This car is a little bit weird. I'm at 3.5 and 1.5, right? But when I first did this car, it was like this, okay? And the problem that was happening with this car was when I would go through turns on the road, and I would be going quickly, right? I would get into them, and then it would start to do this. And it wouldn't push, right? And you could just feel it dying and dragging on that back tire. Alright, and I'm sure a lot of you have felt your tunes do things like this, and you don't know how to make it better, because it feels good, right? You don't want to mess with it, okay? So, from here, what I started to do is I started to see how I could push the rear end up. And I didn't want to mess with the springs because I liked the way that the vehicle traveled when it was being thrown around into corners, right? So obviously you had already seen the final results, but we started to raise the rear end and the rebound of the rear end to get it to push back and push through. So as you can see, like, because it's now rebounding and you have that pressure on the wheel, it has enough to push back and push forward, if you will. Alright, so body acceleration, right? So like, when I originally had it and I was there, I had it looking like one of these. And now, this tune was good. I was performing well with it. It just would always let me down on the road. As you can see, just where it sits when it's on the road. When you take higher speed corners, it will get to a point where it looks like it's gonna hold, and then it breaks. And it wouldn't quite just stay, you see that, in one spot. And it wouldn't hold as well, and it kept pushing back and causing instability. And so what I did to counteract it was stiffened the rear suspension that ever so slight amount. That's actually pretty big. 0.5 is a lot. Don't. And now it was able to hold better and didn't snap back as hard because it just was pushing through instead of going beyond this outer circle where it had lost grip and was beyond its limit. So, if you are having issues with it and you think, I don't know if it's too soft, go and drive corners like this, and if it holds steadier, it's fine. If it snaps around when you are going through corners, you're too soft. Alright, now the other way would be too stiff. Let's go look at too stiff and what too stiff looks like, right? So the reason why, I mean, obviously you'll know you are too stiff as soon as you start to take turns, because you'll start to get, as you're going through the turns on road, the same spikes that you get when you're too soft. You will get those spikes early into your turn. And if it's happening on the way in and you are sliding on the way out, it's too stiff. If you are mid-turn and it starts to slide, you're too soft. Alright? And that's, I think, the simple rule of thumb there. But we're gonna go ahead... Oh, and then the other way that you can tell if you're too stiff is just like, yeah, this looked okay on the road, but look at this. Watch what happens when I start going off-road, alright? Now, this isn't going to be horrible, so, like, don't go like, oh, wow, like, this is an okay setup. If you like stiffer setups, there's nothing really wrong with this. You're just going to die when you hit cross-country bits. Did you see just how crazy this line is? And how it's jumping all over the place? And yeah, it's going to do that on the dirt, but holy crap, look at it go, look at it go, look at it go. Too stiff, alright? The vehicle's too stiff. And you can see it really trying to push its way through the turns, and it's not quite getting there. So instead, what you do Soften it up a bit, okay? Try and make it just move less. Because now you see that the skipping around is still happening and it's constant. And it's always going to be constant, but it's less. You know, and it can always stay going one way, and it's not quite as rampaging all over the place. It has more of a traceable movement. That's when you can start to tell that your suspension is actually working on dirt the way that it needs to. Is when you can get these real smooth and you can push through corners and you can get the car to turn while you're accelerating. If you can get your vehicle to do all of those things and it runs pretty quick, you're just gonna have a good time on dirt. So, there you go. That is it, y'all. That's really all I have. I know I rambled a lot. I'm sorry. I know sometimes I get off track, but I'm just trying to make sure that you guys get all of the information that you need to make the best possible tune. Let me know, I guess, if that helped.